Okay, so the next study that you will be looking at is Simons and Chabris. So Simons and Chabris looks at something called inattentional blindness. So again, it is looking at attention, but this is kind of the idea of, just to put it in perspective, something that's probably happened before. This study kind of asks you to imagine that you're in a crowded cinema, you're busy trying to look for a seat, or a place where there's enough seats for you and your partner, or you and your family to sit together, and you're so kind of focused on that task of looking for a seat that actually you don't see that your other friends are over there waving at you, even though you were probably looking straight at them. So the idea is that because you're so focused on one element of a particular scene, that actually you fail to see other events or objects which are also in that visual field. And that's the idea of inattentional blindness. Okay, so this study examines that in a bit more detail. So I'll just go over a little bit more what attentional blindness relates to. So attentional or inattentional blindness rather can relate to a number of things. So the first thing that it can relate to is focused visual attention. So this is the idea that like the scenes around you in everyday life are quite cluttered, and they present more objects and more stimuli than you can actually respond to simultaneously, so all at the same time, and therefore there's probably more going on in a visual field than you can actually fully perceive at one time. So, in order to cope with this, there are mechanisms of attention that are required to select objects of interest for further processing. So one of these is eye movements, which allow an individual to fixate on a particular region, so a particular part of the visual field, so that that's able to be kind of focused in on by structures within the eye. Now, attention is also necessary for something called change detection. So change blindness is where individuals often do not detect large changes to objects and scenes from one view to the next. So something quite large may change in a particular scene, but actually you only remember those objects that you are actually paying attention to. So I'm just going to show you a clip. I'm not sure if the sound will come across, but I'm going to show you a clip that will demonstrate this change blindness. Okay, so then just watch the rest of this video, and that will outline where actually there was lots of changes that you probably didn't detect. Somebody in this room murdered Lord Fry. Okay, so as it says there, it's easy to miss something that you are not looking for. And so this leads us to look at inattentional blindness. So when attention is diverted to another object or task, observers often fail to perceive an unexpected object, even if it appears at fixation. Okay, so this is also sometimes known as perceptual blindness, but inattentional blindness is what we are looking at. So when you're focused in on one thing, you may fail to notice something else. So I'm just going to show you an example. This isn't from the study, but it is an example of something that was used in an advert, and we'll see if you can demonstrate inattentional blindness. Okay, so this is something which is similar to the study, but not the same as the study. So similar but not the same.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team like to make? The answer is 30. But do you see the
So again, that just demonstrates some inattentional blindness there. There is also a link there. I will give you the slides for a TED talk, I think it is, that I want you to watch on inattentional blindness. But basically the idea is that if you are taking part in a visually demanding task, then that means that your brain becomes loaded. So that means that actually you become increasingly blind to other events and distractions. So the harder you have to concentrate, the less likely you are to be distracted or to see these other extra events. So there are some previous studies that have looked at these ideas. So in these other studies, participants have to engage in a continuous task that requires you to focus on one aspect of a dynamic visual scene whilst ignoring others. So some of these are computer-based dynamics, and others are video-based dynamics. So here is an example of a computer-based dynamic. So this is similar to a study that was done by Mack and Rock. So in Mack and Rock's research, which was in 1998, participants are instructed to judge which of the two arms of crosses, so obviously the arms of the crosses being, you know, the straight lines, so that's an arm and that's an arm, which of the two arms of crosses displayed on a screen is the longer. And then this would usually occur on the fourth trial, but you would get a critical trial where an unexpected object would appear. So they might, for example, put a smiley face on it. Now, this was basically designed to be the kind of visual equivalent of Murray's dichotic listening task. So like when we interpolated digits and instructions with your names on in Murray, instead we were just placing this unexpected stimulus in there. Now this showed that actually the majority of people didn't notice that unexpected event. They only appeared to notice it if that information was meaningful to them. So for example, if their name was written in the smiley face, then they might have noticed it. Lots didn't. And then there's some video-based dynamic events such as I'm going to say NICES, don't know, studies. So they recorded videos of events such as the umbrella and the gorilla that we are going to look at later on, but they were all what you call transparent, so this is what they looked like. So they asked you to concentrate on one element of the video and then created something unexpected, but they were all using kind of semi-transparent figures. Now, the results of these show that the majority of observers did not report seeing the unexpected event, even though it was clearly visible to observers who were not engaged in the concurrent task. So they were unlikely to notice it if we'd asked them to focus on something else in particular, but if we hadn't asked them to focus on anything, they did notice it. So this study wanted to consider factors which could affect inattentional blindness. So it used those kind of video-based methods such as on the previous slide. So it used similar kind of methods as these. But they wanted to look at factors such as superimposition compared to live events. I'll explain that a little bit further on another slide. The impact of task difficulty and the unusualness of the unexpected event. Again, I'll explain each of those later on. So the sample was 228 participants. Now these are referred to as observers, okay, because they are observing an unexpected event. Now almost all of them were undergraduate students. The researchers were based at Harvard University, so that is likely why they got mostly students. Participants either volunteered to participate without any compensation, so they were volunteers but didn't receive anything for volunteering. Some of them received a large candy bar for participating, and some of them who were taking part in a larger scale set of tests received a small fee. So that's because they were taking part in another session and this one together. Now, we did end up removing 36 participants' data. I'll explain why later on again, but that means that we ended up with 192 sets of results across 16 conditions. Now, this was considered to be a lab experiment as it was done under controlled conditions. We have got 4 independent variables. So that is the type of video. So whether the video was transparent or opaque, the type of event, the difficulty of the task, and the team colour that participants or observers were supposed to follow. Now, the dependent variable, what we're measuring, is the number of participants in each condition who noticed an unexpected event. I'll just go over each of those 4 independent variables in a bit more detail. So here's the first one. So the video type, whether it is transparent or opaque. So in a transparent video, the video is what you call superimposed. So in other words, the videos were layered on top of one another, which is why they're semi-transparent. So that would mean that each team was filmed on its own. So the white team was filmed on its own, the black team was filmed on its own, and then the unexpected event was filmed on its own. And then the 3 videos are made semi-transparent and layered on top of each other, and that's what you call superimposing, where they're layered on top of each other. And then the result is something like that. Or it could be opaque, where actually it's all filmed at once and the result is like that. The type of event, and that is whether the unexpected event, used a gorilla or a woman with an umbrella. The difficulty of the task, so whether the task was easy or hard. So in the easy task, they were just asked to count the number of times that a ball was passed. And in the hard task, they were asked to count the number of times that the ball was thrown using aerial passes and bounce passes separately. So they use different types of passes when throwing the ball, and you had to keep account of both types of passes but separate from one another. And that would have been the hard task. And finally, the team colour, so whether you were supposed to follow the actions of the black shirts or the white shirts. So we end up making 4 videotapes. So that is, there's a transparent umbrella woman, a transparent gorilla, an opaque umbrella woman, and an opaque gorilla. So that means that in relation to the 4 independent variables, we have 16 conditions. I'll just flip back a second, because you have transparent or opaque, and then each transparent or opaque video is also either an umbrella or a gorilla, and each of those is then also easy or hard, and each of those is then also either black or white. So you end up with 16 conditions, and participants were equally distributed amongst these 16 conditions. So there are your 16 conditions. So for example, you could have had condition 1 here is you are presented with an umbrella woman that's a transparent video. It's the easy task and you're being asked to follow the white team. Now, the materials used are the 4 videotapes. So each of these videos lasts 75 seconds. In each of the videos, there are 2 teams of 3 players. One team is wearing white shirts and the other is wearing black shirts. Now, they are basketball players, so they move around in a relatively random fashion in an open area that's approximately 3 by 5 metres in front of a bank of 3 elevated doors. Again, I'll just flip back so that you can see that. So that's the area, and you've got a bank of 3 elevator doors. They passed a standard orange basketball to each other in a standardised order. So player 1 would always pass to player 2, 2 to 3, and then 3 would pass back to 1. Okay, so passes were either bounce passes, so they passed it by bouncing it on the ground and then the other player would catch it, or aerial passes, so they would throw it in the air. They're also allowed to dribble the ball, wave their arms, and make other movements that are consistent with playing basketball, basically. Now, after about 44 to 48 seconds of this, one of 2 unexpected events would occur. So in the umbrella woman condition, a tall woman holding an open umbrella would walk from off camera on the left through the action to the right, and the actions of the players just continued as if the unexpected event was not occurring. And in the gorilla condition, a shorter woman wearing a gorilla costume that fully covered her body walked through the action in the same way, so from left to right. Now, in either case, the unexpected event lasted 5 seconds and the players continued during and after the event. There were 2 styles of video made. They were all made using this Super VHS, SVHS video camera, so one similar to this. The transparent video, like I said, the white team were filmed, then the black team, and then the unexpected event, and each of those was layered on top of each other or superimposed using digital video editing software. And in the opaque condition, this required some rehearsal, as all 7 actors, so the 3 white team, the 3 black team, and the unexpected gorilla or woman, were all filmed at the same time. There were 21 experimenters. Okay, now these 21 experimenters used a written protocol in order to ensure that it was standardised. They tested participants individually and all participants gave informed consent. So before they viewed the tape, they were told what they were going to be watching, and they were also told which team they should be following, and they were told to keep a silent mental count of the passes. And then after viewing the video, they were asked to write down their counts. So After they'd done that, they were then asked 3 questions. So the first is, while you were doing the counting, did you notice anything unusual? Then did you notice anything other than the 6 players? And then finally, did you see a gorilla or a woman carrying an umbrella, depending on which condition they were in? Now, if they said yes to any of these, then they were asked to provide details. But if at any point they mentioned the unexpected event, then the rest were skipped. So if, for example, they were asked this first one, and they said, yes, actually, I saw a gorilla, then they would kind of skip the other 2 because there's no reason to then ask them. After questioning, they were asked if they had previously participated in a similar experiment or heard of an experiment or heard of the phenomenon of inattentional blindness. And if they said yes, then their data was then discarded. Participants were also debriefed, and this included them seeing the video again if they asked. So if they had said perhaps that they hadn't seen anything unexpected, they could have the opportunity to actually watch it again. Now, this lasted about 5 to 10 minutes. We did exclude 36 pieces of data, as I mentioned earlier on. So 14 of these were excluded because the participants answered yes to the fact that they had already taken part in a piece of this research, or they'd heard of it, or something like that. 9 because they said that they lost count of the passes, so that means that they probably weren't concentrating well enough on the task that we'd asked them to concentrate on, so then we couldn't use their data for the rest. Passes were incompletely or inaccurately recorded, so if they gave far too many passes or far too few passes, then again that indicated that they weren't concentrating enough on the initial task, or the answers could not be clearly interpreted. So where the participants' total pass count was more than 3 standard deviations away from the mean of the other participants, okay? And that was 1 person we got rid of there. So that means that we ended up with 192 results. And here are the results. So these are the percentages of participants who noticed the unexpected event in each condition. So we can see there's quite a big range of percentages, everywhere from 8% up to 100%. Okay. So we're just going to summarise on the next couple of slides some of these really key findings. So, out of all 192 participants, overall, across all conditions, 54% noticed the unexpected event and 46% failed to. So more did notice than not notice, but not by a large amount. More participants noticed the unexpected event when it was in the opaque condition rather than the transparent. But even then, you can see in the opaque condition, 33% of people are still not noticing that event, despite the fact that it is really visible. And we know that they didn't see anything because we asked them 3 different variations of questions in relation to whether they saw anything. And more participants noticed the unexpected event in the easy task rather than the hard task. So in the task where they're just counting the total number of passes compared to where they are counting the number of aerial and bounce passes separately. More results. So the task difficulty was greater in the transparent rather than the opaque. So when you look at the transparent condition and compare the percentage of times it was noticed in the easy or hard conditions, you can see the difference is bigger than in the opaque one. So the transparent condition, 56% of participants noticed the unexpected event in the easy one. So where the video is semi-transparent and they're just counting the total number of passes, they were more likely to see the unexpected event than if it was semi-transparent and they were trying to focus on a particular type of pass and keeping a separate mental count. But you can see actually there, even though they were still more likely to notice it in the easy one than the hard one, the difference between these percentages in the opaque condition is not as large. The umbrella woman was noticed more times than the gorilla overall, so 65% of times she was noticed, compared to 44% for the gorilla. Now, some people did remark that this was potentially because the umbrella lady was a tall lady anyway, and then obviously she had an open umbrella, so actually her umbrella would have been above the heads of the other players, so it would have been taller than the other players overall. And actually, the colour of the team that you were supposed to follow did seem to have an effect as well. So the gorilla was noticed more by participants who attended to the actions of the black team than those who watched the white team. Okay, so you're more likely to see the gorilla if you were following the team who was dressed in the same colours as the gorilla. However, there was little difference of this when it came to the umbrella woman, even though she was also dressed in dark colours. Now, they did do a separate controlled observation, so completely separate to this, using different participants. Now, this was an opaque video where the gorilla did something that was clearly quite visible, so walked from left to right, but would stop in the middle and like bang on their chest and then walk off. They used 12 different participants and only 50% noticed this. So even when the gorilla was doing something quite visibly different to the rest of the participants, the findings of this mimic the findings on the previous slide. And now you've got some conclusions. So individuals have a sustained inattentional blindness for dynamic events. So that means that we are showing that we are generally still failing to notice these unexpected events when we're concentrating on something else. Individuals fail to notice an ongoing and highly salient but unexpected event if they're engaged in a primary monitoring task. So the primary monitoring task in this was the basketball counting. Inattentional blindness is an ubiquitous perceptual phenomenon rather than an artifact of particular display conditions. So in other words, regardless of whether the task was easy or hard, opaque or transparent, white team, black team, gorilla, umbrella woman, you still saw inattentional blindness across all conditions. Yes, you saw it more frequently in others, but you still saw some element of inattentional blindness. And the level of inattentional blindness depends on the difficulty of the primary task. So that was related to the number, the numbers of the passes, the types of passes that you were counting. Individuals are more likely to notice unexpected events if they are visually similar to the events that they're paying attention to, hence why we saw the gorilla when we were following the black team more often. Objects can pass through the spatial extent of attentional focus and still not be seen if they're not being attended to. So we were focusing there right on the middle of the scene in order to kind of count the passes, and an object passed through this, but because we weren't focused on that particular part of the scene, we didn't see it, if you will. And there's no conscious perception without attention. So in other words, you will see events, but you will not perceive them if you do not pay attention to them.